So I want to begin by asking you a question. I want to ask you the question that every single Easter series begins with, every Easter program on television, every Easter egg hunt, any colorful pastel festivities in the store, all begin with this question. So I want to ask it to you as well this morning. How do you feel about death? Is that not the question we all begin with on Easter? Okay, maybe I got it wrong, but the question still stands. How do you feel at the mention of death? Real talk here. What emotions are generated when death is brought up in conversation? Maybe it's fear, regret, insecurity, anxiety. I want you to just think, right? Is it confusion? What do I feel at the mention of death? You see, in our culture, we actually do not prefer this topic, right? We have cute little ways, trite sayings, euphemisms that we can employ to kind of dance around the subject of death, make it a little bit lighter, and just make it a little bit easier to endure. So perhaps you've heard these. I know someone who has passed away. Okay. My father-in-law has kicked the bucket. My cousin has cashed in her chips. We use expressions like bite the dust, pushing up daisies, sleeping with the fishes. He's called it curtains. He has moved upstate. Have you ever heard these euphemisms before? I don't use these in my everyday vernacular, but Google told me these were some of the more popular ones. So we don't like to look at death. We don't like to face it. We prefer to just dance around it, make light of it, and we'll deal with it when we need to. But regardless of how we typically prefer to talk about death, regardless of our usual feelings, this past year has left us no choice. Right? This has been the longest March 2020 that we have ever endured. That's what it feels like. We are still stuck in a year ago. Death has forced itself into the conversation. Death has become the major headline for over 12 months now. Like never in my life, I'm sure, never in your life, has death tolls been a standard fixture on the evening news. A death count on the front page of our newspapers. How many people have died? It's eerie. Very eerie. Death has taken the spotlight, and what we are seeing is death on center stage. And so we as a society, not just American society, we as a human race have been forced to look death in the eyes. And what is the result been? Look around. What has the result been as a society? What's on the rise? Fear, anxiety, insecurity, shame, regret, and all of these other hosts of emotions that have the world in its grip right now. How do you feel about death? As I was preparing this week, I just realized our euphemisms have evaporated, friends. There's no longer dancing around the subject. We have been reminded in the harshest of terms this year that death is undefeated. Death is just so final. Death always seems to have the last laugh. And so here's what we're going to do. For the next 3 weeks in this series, for this Easter season, we are going to come together and we are going to remind ourselves that there was a man named Jesus Christ who came, he lived on this earth, a real person, he died a very real death, and then he broke death's undefeated streak by rising from the dead. For the next few weeks, we're going to remind each other that Jesus Christ came and he looked death in the eyes, and he showed us that the author of life has victory over death. Jesus showed us that death doesn't get the final say. He does. He conquered death in his resurrection. And so as we celebrate the resurrection, we ask ourselves, what does his resurrection mean for us? We believe he rose from the dead a couple thousand years ago. How is that relevant for what I'm going through today? How is that relevant for 2021? How does that shape the way that we feel and talk about death? And here's what it means. I'm going to give you the answer right now. Okay? So if you need to leave, you can leave after this moment. We're going to talk about this and we realize that the fear that is gripping our world right now need not apply to you and to me. The fear that is gripping the world right now need not apply to us. Today, in just a few moments, we're going to see that the resurrection, it's more than just a historical reality. It's more than just a fact that we subscribe to. The resurrection, the literal resurrection, is dripping with relevance for our present fearful moment. And when we consider, when we contemplate the power of the resurrection, fear is replaced with confidence. The pain of loss and separation is filled in with hope. The laugh of death becomes a whimper, and the sting of death is removed, all because of the resurrection. So I want you to join me for a few moments this morning as we dive into our text, because we're going to see that you and me, we can face death with certainty, not fear, with certainty, because Jesus Christ most certainly rose from the dead. And I'm going to show that to you in our passage today. So are you ready? Are you ready to see that the fear of the world need not grip us? Well, we're going to check it out here. If you have your Bibles open, we are in 1 Corinthians 15, starting in verse 1, and we are in our series, No Fear in Death. We begin in verse 1. Now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, and by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day, in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Let's pause right there, and let's just look at this section of Scripture. Okay? So Paul begins chapter 15 with a reminder. He says, brothers, I want to remind you of what? Remind you of the gospel. Everybody say, gospel. Gospel. Right, with our masks on. Say one more time. Gospel. We say this word a lot, right? We love the gospel. Gospel. Thank God for the gospel. Gospel-centered gospel. What does gospel mean? I don't know. I just said in church. All right. We've heard this word. Children, you hear your parents talk about this. Gospel, let me define it for you. It's very simple. Gospel simply means good news. Okay? The gospel is good news. Not a theory, not a suggestion, not a pretty good philosophy for life, not some advice. The gospel is news. Something has happened. There is an event in the news, and that news must be announced. God has good news. And so for the children in the room, where are my children at? Hello, children. Good to see you. Glad you're here. For the children in the room, as well as for the child that lives in here, my inner child, I want to show you what the gospel is like. Because the gospel is good news. Did you guys know that? Did you know? The gospel is good news. There's news that happened. And so in this church, in Christendom, we talk about this news quite a bit. And sometimes we talk about the gospel like this. Sometimes we talk about this news like this. It is just, we can condense it into a nutshell, right? I can tell you the gospel in one sentence. I can summarize the gospel succinctly for you in 30 seconds. I could also stand up here and talk to you about it for 60 minutes. 60 minutes? You didn't tell me to preach this for 60 minutes. I'm just kidding. It's 55, okay? I can summarize it. We can go to a Bible study and talk about it for 2 hours, right? You can go away to a retreat and talk about it all weekend. Or you can literally spend your entire life exploring the depths and the riches and mining for the treasures and implications of the gospel. In some ways, we will never exhaust just how big the gospel is. And friends, that's what we're going to be doing here for the next few decades. We're going to be exploring the riches of the gospel. Are you ready for that? Amen. Yeah, you are. Come on. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. And so Paul, he knows these people, right? And Paul says, hey, I went to you. Paul literally spent 3 years in Corinth unpacking the gospel. They understood the gospel better when Paul left than they did before he died. And so he says to them, don't forget, I preached the gospel to you. This is news. I preached the gospel to you. I unpacked it for you. I handed it to you. You received this gospel. And now he says, hey, I know I've been gone for a little bit, but now I want to remind you. And he's going to give us a succinct reminder. Just a high-level, big-picture outline. Don't forget the gospel. And how many of you know that reminders are good? Anybody appreciate a good reminder? I often say, my children, they need to be reminded far more than they need to be taught. Okay? Because we are forgetful. And you know who else is forgetful? The man in the mirror. We forget a lot of things, right? How many of you guys this week went upstairs to get something and you got there and said, I have no idea what I'm doing here? But just stand there and look like you know what you're doing, right? Dude, I'm forgetful. I talk so much. Like, I'll be in conversation, I have so many words, and then I'm so animated, I get into a story, and I'm like, yeah, and then this happened. Why was he telling that story again? We're forgetful. But Paul knows that we cannot afford to forget the gospel. And so he gives us this reminder. He gives us a reminder. He says, this is not just something that I want you to record in some dusty old bylaws, and then let's move on with our lives. Well, the gospel is of first importance. Everybody say gospel one more time. It just feels good to hear you say that. The gospel is of first importance. This is the foundation, church. Church, look at me here. Newly pastor alert. I'm telling you the most important thing. If we lose this, we've lost everything. If we do not keep a grasp of this as a church, as a young church that is excited about the future, if we lose this, we lose our soul. And all of the busyness, and all of the activity, and all of the sermons, and all of the groups, and all of the ministries, it's pointless. Because this is the foundation. So I'm committed to being here to just remind you every 7 days. Don't forget. I would remind you, brothers and sisters, don't forget. This is of first importance. And here's why this is so important, and here's why I literally will grow old doing this for the rest of my life. Because a lot of times in the church, we treat the gospel like the ABCs. Okay? Those are the fundamentals. I learned that when I was a child. I got the gospel, it got me into the family, but now, let's talk about more mature things. Let's talk about deeper things, right? Let's move on and graduate to real theology. But that's not how Paul talks about the gospel. He doesn't say, don't forget the gospel, now let's move on. He says, no, the gospel is literally everything. The gospel, church, is your past. He says, you've received it. Past tense. It's your past. The gospel is the message through which God saved you. Your story, your testimony will always have a special place for the gospel. When you first heard it and understood it, that's when God saved you. The gospel is your past. But the gospel is also your present. He says, in which you stand. This is the foundation of your life. Your relationship with God, your relationship with others, your sense of purpose, your very identity, all flow out of this gospel. The gospel is your present. The gospel is also your future. He says, in which you are being saved. As we hold fast to the gospel, as we continue to rehearse it and conform our lives to it, that message, it's keeping us, it's protecting us, it is sustaining us and moving us toward the day that we will see Jesus face to face and our salvation will be complete. How can we possibly hold fast to that day? The gospel will save us. The gospel as we hold fast. How many times can you say gospel before it doesn't sound like a word anymore, right? Gospel, gospel, gospel. Okay, Paul, we get it, it's important. Just give us your reminder moment. What are you trying to remind us of? He says, I'm glad you asked. Don't forget this. I want to remind you, brothers, that, first of all here, of first importance, I want you to remind you that Christ died for our sins. Jesus Christ died, but it wasn't an accident. It wasn't some tragedy. Jesus Christ willingly embraced death on a cross to pay the penalty that you deserve. Jesus died for your sins, just like the scriptures promised. Look what else he wants to remind them of. He says, don't forget, he was buried. Jesus was most certainly dead. He was not knocked unconscious. The crucifixion was not a metaphor for Jesus' influence that died. No, Jesus was dead. He was in the grave, he was buried. And on the third day, next point, he was raised. He was raised to life. I know that sounds crazy, but he actually appeared. He appeared to Peter. He appeared to the 12. He appeared to more than 500 brothers. Most of them are still alive. Go ask them. They saw him. He appeared to me. I'm a first-hand witness here. Jesus rose from the dead. Yes, he was most certainly dead, but he is most certainly alive. And so his reminder is very succinct here, right? This is nutshell. High-level outline, and we know that every part of this outline is very important. He lived, he died, he was buried, he rose from the dead. But can you hear the emphasis here on one of these points? Right? He's like A, B, C, D. Right? Like his summary here is very resurrection heavy. He is emphasizing the fact Jesus rose from the dead. He appeared to a lot of people. How do we know? Because he appeared to a lot of people. Because he really did rise from the dead. He rose from the dead. Did I mention he rose from the dead? And through his emphasis here, his point is very clear. Jesus was undeniably, literally resurrected from the dead. We believe that. Say that and just sit in that for a second and go, that's wild. We believe that, church. Do you believe that? No, like literally, like do you believe that? You're like, they gotta say that in church, but we know, like come on, like for real though. No, we literally believe that the man Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And this is a crucial part of the outline. Like, you cannot remove this piece of the gospel without seeing the whole thing crumble. We believe that Jesus was undeniably, literally resurrected from the dead. And this part of the outline, he's emphasizing that, and he's zooming in right now. Because he wants us to get there. And in a few moments, we're going to see why he's emphasizing this, but suffice it to say for now, he was emphasizing the literal resurrection of Jesus because it was extremely relevant for what these people were going through. Just like it is for us. Death was dominating the headlines in this church family, just like it is for us. And Paul wants them to know that the resurrection is extremely relevant. There was a lot of thinking, there was a lot of discussion, there were even some funny teachings about this resurrection. And so Paul starts here, because the resurrection of Jesus has major implications for how we think about our own death. I can't talk to you about your death, I can't talk to you about my death, until we understand about Christ's death. And it's this: Jesus was undeniably, literally, resurrected from the dead. Fact. Hard stop. Do you believe this? And so we establish this fact, but remember, Paul is going somewhere with this, okay? Paul is not primarily concerned with history. There is more here going on than simply him wanting us to subscribe to the historical fact. The historical reality of Jesus' resurrection has major implications for us today in this present moment. And now let's continue through the passage and see what those implications are. Are you with me? You ready? Good. All right, here we go. Next verse. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I'm the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we preach, and so you believe. And so Paul, he's taking a moment here in this chapter to focus on his own experience with the resurrected Jesus Christ. He says, hey, I saw him. He appeared to me. So guys, check this out. Not only is this further evidence of the resurrection, like we literally have Paul writing saying, I saw him. So not only do we have further proof, look what he's saying. He said, he appeared to me. Emphasis on me. Like guys, come on. Me. The opponent of Christ, the one who intimidated and killed his followers. I was completely unworthy to be called an apostle. I was completely unworthy to have anything to do with Jesus, and yet, he saved me. He saved me. He called me to preach the gospel. How do I explain this? How can Paul possibly explain this? Well, he says it very well. By the grace of God, I am what I am. I'm so glad that Paul takes a moment here to recount his own experience with the resurrected Jesus. Because when we realize that God appeared, that Jesus Christ, the resurrected Lord, appeared to Paul, we realize that a very beautiful fact is being illustrated here. Because of the resurrection, we now know that no one is beyond the reach of God's transformative grace. No one is beyond the reach of God's transformative grace. We heard the gospel, right? We heard the outline. Jesus came, he lived, he died, he rose from the dead. We hear the gospel. But now we see the gospel lived out in real time. In Paul's life, we see the reason for all of this. Why this? Because God's grace will save even murderers. Paul's life is illustrating the fact that no matter how far you are out there, no matter how much you think you've done, no matter how much you feel like you've disqualified yourself, no one is beyond the reach of God's transformative grace. God is willing to treat everyone in grace because Jesus has already come and taken our place. That's the point of this outline. That's the point of the gospel. Jesus came, the Son of God, came and was treated as a sinner and a criminal so that sinners and criminals can come and be treated as sons and daughters of God. That's the gospel. That's the importance of the resurrection. This transformation that we're seeing in Paul's life is simply the outworking of resurrection power. Just like God raised Jesus from death to life, so too he is raising up you and me from spiritual death to life, making us alive with Jesus. And so friends, just like Paul, you too can be made new. You too can experience the resurrection power of God taking us from spiritual death to life. If you just ask him. If you come to Christ and go, I believe that. Please save me. And he saves you. And so do you see the power of Paul's ministry here? Do you understand why his ministry was so effective? Not only does he preach about the resurrection of Jesus, he is a living demonstration of God's resurrection power. His life is proof that God raises dead things to life. That's the power of his ministry. And church, that's the power of your ministry. God doesn't want to simply send you throughout the shore speaking a message. He is sending us throughout the shore embodying this message. I once was dead in sin, alone and broken, but God made me alive. We are showing the world that no one is beyond the reach of God's transformative grace. This is the power of the resurrection. The historical fact of Jesus' resurrection, it has implications for us here in this moment in terms of a spiritual resurrection. But wait, there's more. Because if Paul stopped there, we'd go, all right, I get it. Metaphorically speaking, right? Spiritually speaking, no. There's also implications for you and I's physical resurrection. So I ask you, is there life after death? What's waiting for you beyond the grave? Like, do we really expect hope on the other side of death? Well, that's what Paul gets to here in our final section. Look at in verse 12. Now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is not true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. So the Corinthians, they're going through something. How many of you guys have ever been part of a community group or a missional community or a Bible study or something like that? Okay, MC leaders, look around. If they're not raising their hand, get it. I'm just kidding. I want you to imagine that the Corinthians, they're chilling on a Saturday morning or a Saturday evening, whatever it is, and they're going to somebody's house. They're probably going to, Socrates' house, and they're chilling over there in Corinth. And many of you guys know the typical scene, right? It's like 10 decibels because the kids are running around. They're screaming at pictures only dogs can hear. Somebody's on cupcake duty, so you got the cupcakes in, the dog runs by. And it's just mass chaos, right? This is not a good commercial for community groups, I get it. I'm never joining that. But they're in community group, and finally you get the last kid, he's in the basement, you close the door, you lock it. Maybe, I don't judge if you do it, but they're in the basement, the volume comes down, the conversations in the kitchen, they're starting to dwindle down, and now it's like, all right, we're starting to move into the living room for the discussion. And as you guys are starting to mingle in, you're sitting around there, and you realize that dominating the side conversations, key in a lot of people's minds, are the high number of deaths that have been happening in the community. And so it's like people are talking, and you're like, hey, we're actually talking about the same thing. What are you saying? And you before you know it, you're sitting there in the circle, and you haven't dove into the study yet, but you guys are just talking about these deaths. Random tragedies, sickness, maybe even a global pandemic, who knows? But death is at the forefront of your minds. Death has forced itself into the conversation. And you guys are sitting there. It's heavy. That's good. And you're talking and you appreciate the fact that we actually have a place that we can talk about now. Speaking of missional community, where's the basement when you need it? Get down, child! Hey, buddy. Oh, embarrassing. Hey there. All right. Yep, that happened. It has to happen at least once. Hey, bud, you need to go now. Okay, you want to say hi? Say hi to everybody? All right. You'll be a preacher one day, okay? Let's go. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm officially that preacher now. That's embarrassing. I'm sorry. Oh man, I forgot what I was saying. We're so forgetful. So I think I was saying the fact of Christ's resurrection. I'm just kidding. I was like, we just restart the whole thing 30 minutes ago. No! But you're in MC and there's this heavy conversation going on, right? And then one of the leaders drops this bomb. They're sitting there and they say, I can't believe I'm never going to see them again. Like it's so fun. Like, I'm never going to get on the boat with my dad again. I'm never going to see him again. It's done. And somebody else in the group goes, well, yeah, you mean like until we get to heaven, right? And he goes, no, like, there's no life after death. Like, I'm never going to see him again. And they're like, well, you mean like on this side? And he's like, no, there is no resurrection. This is the only life we get. And everybody who's sipping their coffee is like, oh. What did you say? What would you do at that moment? Your MC leader just drops the bomb. There is no life after death. And so you can just imagine the looks on their faces. Is that what Paul said? Like, you got your notes on you? Like, what, is that what we received? And then somebody's like, I think we should get Paul on the line. That sounds a little funny to me. And so they text him, ancient style, handwriting. Children, pens and pencils. Google them. So they write this letter to Paul, like, Paul, can you settle the matter for us? Because I could have sworn you said this, but my MC leader is saying this. What is going on? And so Paul, that's actually why he's writing this section of the letter. He is writing this chapter to help set the record straight. There were people here saying there is no resurrection of the dead. And so Paul, he's going to answer a couple of questions for them. They're asking, Paul, please just tell us plainly, will we be resurrected after death or not? Another question. Can we be certain that there is hope on the other side? How many of you guys right now know that in the COVID world, these questions are just as relevant for us as they were for you? Well, I see my pastor again, who died from COVID. Will I see my grandmother again this year, who passed away this year? Will I get to be with Dad again? Will I see my friends? Will I see my loved ones? What is truth, Paul? And so like a good teacher, Paul doesn't simply give them the answer. Paul doesn't write them and go, X, Y, Z, boom, bada bing, next. No, Paul, like a good teacher, he goes, okay, well, some of you guys are saying this, So, why don't we draw that idea to its logical conclusion? If this is true, if what you are saying is true, that there is no resurrection of the dead, if the dead are not raised, then let's connect the dots here. Let's test that hypothesis. Let's put it to the test. If that's true, then this and this and this. And he starts to begin what I call the most depressing domino effect you've ever seen in your life, right? And so the dominoes, not yet, brother, different domino illustration. Not yet, different dominoes. I messed up there, okay? And so he comes and he says, well, if this is true, then boom, 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 boom. And look what he says, okay? If there's no resurrection of the dead, if the dead are not raised, then that means that not even Christ has been raised. If there's no resurrection from the dead, that means Jesus is still dead. Like, logically speaking, Jesus is still dead. Okay? Well, if Jesus is still dead, then our preaching is in vain, because your boy's sitting here telling you to put your faith in someone who's dead. That's in vain. That is futile. Your faith is in vain. You guys are literally sitting here following a dead person. And if that's true, let's state the obvious. If Jesus is still dead, then we are liars. We are misrepresenting God, which is a very nice way of saying we're lying to you through our teeth. So next time you're caught lying, say, I wasn't lying, I was misrepresenting the truth. If this is not true, then we are liars, because we're literally writing to you saying that we saw him. So that's the obvious. And if we're lying, look what else is true. You're still in your sins. If Jesus is still dead, then who's atoned for your sins? No one. Here's the most depressing one. If there's no resurrection of the dead, then there is no reunion with our loved ones who have passed away in Christ. He says it here, those who have fallen asleep, they've perished. They didn't just pass away, they are gone for good. And then, you ready for the last depressing domino? If all of these things are true, then you and me are the most pitiable people in the world. Because we have put all of our eggs in the basket of the life to come. Part of the Easter pun. We have put all of our eggs in that basket. And if that basket doesn't exist, guys, we have made a horrible decision. We deserve to be pitied if we have hope in this life only. Because we are a people who are standing up every day saying, I'm dying to this life, and I'm putting all my eggs in that basket. I'm not living for the now, I'm living for the life to come. So if there's no life to come, blew it, friends. YOLO, you only had this life, and you wasted it. We know that's not true, right? We'll get there. We know that's not true. We know that, yes, things may be hard in this life, but this is just a momentary, light affliction compared to the eternal weight of glory that is to come. We know that. But Paul, again, is testing this hypothesis. And his point is clear, right? Clearly, their logic is flawed. Clearly, they have not thought this idea through all the way. Go back to the very beginning. Jesus was literally raised from the dead. Therefore, friends, we know that because of the resurrection, we have hope in a life to come. Because of the resurrection, we have hope in the life to come. And so, hey, MC leaders, elders, teachers who are teaching that there is no resurrection, I have something for you. How can you say this? How can some of you say this? You need to understand, as do we, that the resurrection of the dead is not up for grabs. This is not a debatable point, take it or leave it. This is a core component of our faith and of our gospel. And to try and remove it from the gospel is like trying to pluck one piece of a domino from a tightly wound domino construction. Touch it, and the whole thing crumbles. Touch it, and see the whole thing collapse. And so this is ultimately where Paul was going. And this is ultimately where we are going for the next couple of weeks. We started at number 1. Jesus was undeniably, literally, resurrected from the dead. And so because he went from death to life, God is taking people like you and me from death to life. And we know that no one is beyond the reach of God's transformative grace. And then finally we saw that because of Jesus' resurrection, we have hope in a life to come. Friends, death was not the end for Jesus. Therefore, we can be certain that death is not the end for you and for me. We have hope, not only in this life, but also in the life to come. And here's the idea I want you to end with. We can face death with certainty because Christ most certainly rose from the dead. Church, as you leave here this morning, please remember the fear, the anxiety that is gripping our world right now need not apply to you. There's a resurrection. I believe there's a resurrection. I believe that we will live again. I believe that because Jesus rose from the dead, that our approach to death is radically altered. I believe that Jesus' resurrection has proven that death is not game over. I believe that we can face death with certainty because Jesus most certainly rose from the dead. And so what about our loved ones? What about those that we've lost this year? What about your friends, your family, your relatives that have passed away in Christ? Should they have fear? No fear in death. They face death with certainty because Christ most certainly rose from the dead. And so here's what the hope of our gospel is. Because of the resurrection, check this out. I want to end here. Because of the resurrection, this is what we believe about those who have passed away. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 14. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. You will see them again. I will see them again. And I will live boldly in this life with no fear, no anxiety, no insecurity, no regrets, no confusion about the matter. The fear of this world has no grip on me. I face death with certainty, and so can you, because Christ most certainly rose from the dead. Do you believe that? Me too. Let's pray. Father, we love you. We thank you for the gospel that you have given to us. It is everything, Lord, our past, our present, our future. It is sustaining us. And so, Lord, today we believe. We reaffirm our belief in the resurrection. We remind each other of the implications of that resurrection. We call one another to live in certainty and confidence because of what the resurrection is. So, Father, send us out here. May we be the aroma of boldness and confidence. May our confidence and certainty, like a diffuser, spread throughout this community. And may people go, man, why are you not shaken? And we can say, because Christ rose from the dead. So I face death with certainty. We thank you, Lord, that you have conquered death. You have defeated the grave. You looked death in the eyes. So now that we don't have to fear. We praise you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.